Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's conversation with Peter Torberg. My name is Michael Cronin, and I'm going to talk to Peter this evening about various aspects of his work as a translator. The first thing to know is that Peter is one of Germany's leading English language translators. He has quite a phenomenal output in all areas of translation: audiobooks, radio scripts, theatre, short stories. The novel, amongst the writers that he has translated are Paul Auster, Peter Carey, Anita Desai, Christopher Hitchens, William Golding, Rudyard Kipling, our own Deirdre Madden, and Conor McPherson, Michael Ondaatje, Mark Twain, Irvine Welsh, and of course one of the most famous graduates of Trinity College Dublin, Oscar Wilde. So Peter, I wanted to sort of begin by asking you a question about how you got involved in the business of translation in the first place. Were you kind of an accidental tourist who kind of stumbled into translation, or was it something that you always had in mind as a vocation, a career?
That's a very good question, because it all actually started as an accident. While studying English and modern history, I stumbled upon a book which I thought was so amazingly important for the German literature and for German readers that I thought we need a translation of this one book. I found a publisher for it, and it was printed to high acclaim, which I thought was phenomenal for me, and that was my entrance ticket to the profession of translator. But there was obviously some kind of little voice in the back of my head who always said, you are interested in that, why don't you try to have Kurt Vonnegut's novels translated, or things like that. So I, even before that, started to get in contact with the editors, with publishers, and didn't work out that well, but I never had in mind that this will be a profession I would actually have for quite a while now.
And just, can you tell us a little bit more about that first translation? I mean, do you still have it? I mean, amongst all your many translations.
You really wanted me to show you that translation?
Well, we have to see how it began.
This is one of the magics of Zoom, that you can just turn around in your study and pick up the things you otherwise don't have with you in university class or wherever. This is the original American version, Double or Nothing by Raymond Federman. It's the story of a young man who goes to the United States after World War II, after all of his family died in Auschwitz, and he only has one uncle left, doesn't even speak French, and this uncle gets this young man over to the States, and it's the story of what happens in the first couple of months, and the story of that person who wants to write down this story of that young man. So a very postmodern twist to it. But in this case, like unlike other postmodern novels, it actually works. So there is a really strange guy in this book who sits down and calculates what does he need to write down this book. Okay, he needs a room, he needs rent, he needs food, he needs toothpaste, he needs toilet paper, all the stuff he needs, a paper, a pen. And he calculates all the time what he's doing there. So the book itself looks like tohu wabohu of things. Every page looks different from the other. Calculations, but in between, he tells us the story. At the end of the book, the guy decides he doesn't have the money to write down this book he has written already for us. So I actually like that twist. And on the other hand, it's a very, very dramatic story about how he loses his family in France and how he survives World War II that just appealed to me. And I thought that would be a perfect book to translate. My hometown is Dortmund, sister city of Buffalo, New York, the place where this author lived at that time. So I simply went to the city of Dortmund and asked for help. They had a special paper cut for me because you can write that down on your average A4 paper. Mm. So I really had huge A3 paper to write on a mechanical typewriter. When I found a publisher in German, though, the problem was the whole book had to fit into this format. It's a book series called The Different Library or The Other Library, edited by Hans Magnus Enzensberger. And the point was that we had to turn this American typescript photocopied book into a book that was actually hand set in lead. And we really had to cut pages of the original in two to have that design back. It was a huge collaboration with the author and with the editor and the typesetter and everything. So it was just a tremendous amount of work. And this book came out while I was in the States studying. And it actually sold something like 50,000 copies. It's just amazing. And so when I came back, publishers knew of me, had my name down, and I got the Blacks books offered, and that was it. That was it. I never turned back, and it's like I never had to look for another job.
Right. Yeah.
Very lucky. Very, very lucky.
I want to kind of, consider two kinds of relationships that a translator might have with an author, and I want to begin with the dead ones first. The sort of major writers in the canon that you've translated, like Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, and so on. When you go to translate somebody like Twain or Wilde, do you, I suppose, firstly, do you read other translations by other translators, or do you that no matter how well known the text is, you just go at it blind? And I suppose the other question is, why do you think that whereas we don't have different versions of Lady Windermere's Fan in English, I mean, we have different performances, but the text itself remains relatively static, that there is a felt need in translation of different languages to every so often, have these retranslations of the same work?
That's a very interesting question. I always have to answer when I have my courses at the university, and I really don't know the answer to that. First, when I look at the possibility of retranslating a modern classic, say, I do not read the translations before my work. I do not want to translate something where every word differs from any other translation before that. Doesn't make sense. So what I do is I try to understand, I try to find out what I understand about that book. And then I start to translate, start to find the problems or the opportunities within the text. And then I translate it. I do look into translations of other people after I finished my draft. Mm. And I'm very proud to admit that should I come across a sentence that's much, much better in an earlier translations, I adopt it. Why not? Mm. If I see, in the first translation of Fahrenheit 432-1, my colleague has found a much, much clearer formula to translate this section, I'm happily and I'm pleased to say, yeah, you're better than me, I adopt it. Should you start and take all the translation, let's say, of the Jungle Books and start to compare them, you will never start translating the book at all. Mm. Because second part of the question is why there are several translations of one original. A translation of a text is always at a different time slot than the original. There's no way around it. You cannot have a translation while the original is being written. Oh, that would be a nice project, though. So there always is a difference in time and space, like a Chinese novel of the 16th century, although there are no novels in the 16th century, but a Chinese text of the 16th century, for a translation, you really have to understand the circumstances, and then you try to transmit that into your own cultural surroundings while explaining a bit about it. It's difficult. The position of a translator can be transformer, that I show you a text that hasn't been shown to people before in your own language, and you sometimes are a teacher. When you have something that's very, very rare to find, and you want to submit that to your audience, you really have to explain a bit more about the text while you translate that, or you have a huge apparatus in the back of the book or anything like that, or an introduction, whatever. So it depends on the book itself, what my position as a translator is. Translations tend to grow old, but books in general tend to grow old. So a modern classic has proven through time that it's a classic. Lord of the Flies has definitely not been written with the intention of being the Nobel Prize winning book by Golding. But it is. So we know now that there is something more in the book than just that time sequence when it was written. Something maybe the author doesn't know consciously about. But we as translators find out later, when we come back to those classics, that there are different levels of storytelling within that certain book. If there aren't any other levels, this book would have been forgotten anyway. So when there are hundreds of thousands of original books out there that haven't been translated at all. They had their time, they had their readership, and that's just it. This book doesn't call for a translation. Maybe it's just fine for the author or for the reader. But in a classic or a modern classic that has shown or that has proven to be very important will always be looked at after a certain period of time by a new translator or by new translators. And a new time that asks, why is this book still important? I got questions during the translation of Lord of the Flies. Why do you want to translate that again? It's the story is obvious, and it's a bit stuffy now, and it's a bit dusty. No, it's not. It's a story about the human condition. And we know now more about that than readers at that time, even in German, knew about that when it came out. This translation came out about 2 years after the original came out. So it's awfully, I think, important to look at important original works. After a while, let's say after 2-3 decades, you can look at it again. And it's nice to have several translations. You, as a reader in that language, has the chance to look into all of them if you want to. It's just fantastic. It's like the translation of Dostoevsky into English, Crime and Punishment. The German translation from the 1920s, the title was totally different. It was more like, oh, I can't even translate that fast. It was more moral, also Schuld und Sühne. So it's penance, has nothing to do with any kind of legal crime and punishment. The new translation that is just out some years now is called Crime and Punishment in German too. So that something happened. And a new translation will always try to find out what happened.
And Peter, you know, I mean, what I suppose one of the things you're sort of describing there is how every translation is a reading. It's a particular reading. It's a new reading. It's an alternative reading of familiar text. So I mean, this is the case of writers who are dead either recently or long since. What about your relationship with living authors and writers? Because a great number of the people you've translated are still alive and with us. I mean, do you as a translator develop a relationship with these writers? Do you have to feel a certain kind of sympathy or empathy for a writer that you're going to translate? So a little bit about that kind of relationship between you as translator and these living English language writers.
For me personally, it's very important to have the chance to either know them or to write to them, to have a contact with the author. For me personally, it's very important to have that voice in my mind while I translate a text. I have the feeling that I know more about the book when I know a bit about the writer. I think it all started with the very first book. Rembert Federman turned out to be a very, very good friend of mine, and I translated all of his work into German with the exception, I think, of 2 books, and we even have books in German that never came out in English. And we had a very, very good friendly relationship, and I think we turned out friends. And I think this inspired me to look for the opportunity to get to know the people and to talk to them, either to like them or dislike them. Even that is just fine by me. If I don't like the person that much, or the writer doesn't answer my questions, that's fine by me. This also tells something about the book and about the relationship between the author and the book, and what that person thinks about the future history of that book and the world. So for me, yeah, I know of other translators who don't care much about that. They have the book, they like the book, they translate it. But I do actually look into trying to find and get into contact with the authors, like Adrian, McKinty and I, we mail about football results and stuff. And David Peace and I, we're just about the same age, and we come from quite the same cultural background in different countries. So we talk about a lot more than just the stuff that's in the books. And that helps a lot. It helps a lot to translate a novel that takes place during the miners' strikes in the 70s in Great Britain, when you have the chance to talk to the author about that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to meeting people and to talk to them about their books and their texts. Helps me a lot.
Of course, one of the things that I'm sure a lot of people, watching us this evening, they probably are anxious to know, are there particular writers who are really not helpful at all to use as a translator, or actively hostile to what you were doing?
Depends. In my experience, almost all of the writers are very, very helpful and very pleased to be contacted by their translators. They're very helpful. But once in a while, let's say in the last 30 years, I came across, let's say, probably 5 people who are not helpful at all, or apologetic about that. That they said, "This is just my book. That's all I can tell you about that book. So here it is. Don't ask me any questions whatsoever," or even never answered at all. Like Anita Desai is a very prominent example, excuse me. Her book takes place in Berlin shortly before World War II. And there is a Jewish wood dealer who goes to India to buy wood for furniture. And he ends up in prison in India together with all the Nazis, but he's Jewish. The British don't care about that, so he's there, and he never comes back to Germany, so he ends up in Bombay. In the first part of the book, there are some historical errors, minor factual corrections to be made, and Anita Desai never answered. So we really had to just change that on our own. Yeah. It might be a particular challenge for me. This might be different in other countries, I'm not sure about that. But I do think that a German reader wants to have his facts correct. Mm. So if the world turns around the wrong way, he would notice right away. And then the suspense of disbelief would be gone. Mm. If those facts aren't right, then the book can't be right, even if it's fiction. Mm. The world turning the wrong way around is actually a thing I had in a novel. It's a novel by Larry Beinhardt, Wag the Dog, the novel behind that movie. Mm. And there is a scene somewhere in the book where a private eye follows an actress. She should be on stage someplace in the States, but isn't, and he follows her. And he flies from here to there and there, and I noticed there's something wrong. The world turns around the wrong way. The American publisher didn't care about that. They printed it that way, and even the author didn't notice it. So
it seems as if, the translator is not only to kind of literally is to put the world to rights,
It's so funny. And, it might be my personal tick that I look things up like that, even if they're obvious, like the world turns round, so he flies around the world, but I somehow noticed that the times did turn out right, just the wrong way around.
So it's the.
I'm sorry.
No, but so one of the things that is very striking about your career as a literary translator is just the sheer variety of different genres that you've worked in, from audiobooks to theatre to short stories to the novel. I mean, do you feel that some types of writing are more difficult to translate than others, or is the genre, it doesn't matter at all? I mean, there's difficult texts and easy text irrespective of whether it's a play or an audiobook or so is there a sense in which are there types of writing that are more challenging for you as a translator?
Absolutely. There are differences, but I do have to take care that I do not treat a text that I think is easy too lightly. The very first book I translated was obviously a very, very difficult book to translate, just when you look at the format and everything, but I didn't care about that. I just started, was naive as a student, you don't care about things like that. But after a while I noticed that there are easier texts or more complicated texts. But the moment I'm interested in the text, I have the good fortune to be able to translate texts I like or I don't like, and I want to find out why I don't like them. I do not have to take every book I'm offered, so I'm very privileged in that respect. I do have translated novels that really buggered me, and I wanted to find out why. But usually it's a text that really tells me something about either the author or the other world or about me. And then every text is just about as difficult as the other one. You look differently at the text, but the work itself is just about the same with every kind of text, whether it's a novel or a play or a stage play. Maybe there's one thing that connects all the texts that I've translated so far is the spoken quality. For me, it seems to be very important that I have a voice of that text. And it's the voice of a text, not the voice of the author. The author can invent whatever kind of voice he wants. But it's the voice of the text that I really like a lot. And then I try to find out what it is, and then I try to find that German equivalent for that text. So maybe it's not that the large variety of texts, but the property of having a voice in the text that I'm looking for.
Just on the question of voice, Peter, what do you, or how do you cope with the fact that, you know, particular kinds of texts, you know, they're situated in particular places, you know, people have got particular voices, particular words, particular accents, they have a history, so there's all these kind of cultural references. I mean, the book that you were planning to translate when you come to Dublin by Adrian McKinty, you know, about an RUC officer who's Catholic, so set in Northern Ireland, and the, I mean, how do you cope with that in translation? I mean, you know, because you're not going to have, you know, somebody speaking with, you know, a markedly kind of Prussian accent if the, you know, if the action takes place in Belfast or Derry or Lurgan. You know, it's so, you know, how do you deal with that specific challenge of translating text?
This is certainly one of the most important questions you can ask a translator. Okay, here's a confession. I do not know a single living or dead translator that has been able to translate dialects or sociolects from one language into the other one-to-one. There's no way to transfer the connotations of, let's say, a Southern American Black dialect into any kind of dialect in German that's not a regional German dialect. So you would have to invent new dialects all the time. But when you have a book where only the fun of several dialects is the story, then this probably is not a story that's very important to be translated. Irvine Welsh's Trainspotting would be a good example. It's taking place in Edinburgh. You have that junkie scene, and they don't really want to be understood. They do not use words you find in a dictionary. And there would be no way for you to find that word even in an English dictionary or in a Scottish dictionary. What do you do then in a translation? You can try to invent a kind of junkie speak somewhere in German, but then you would very easily have a junkie scene not in Edinburgh, but in Berlin, say. Well, that's not the point. If the only point of Trainspotting would have been the Scottish dialect, then I wouldn't have translated the book. The problem which I actually think it's not a problem, the point with the German language is when I translate and I want to show the reader that there are different voices speaking, I can use very, very small aspects in a sentence to mark that in a German text. You don't have to invent dialects or whatever, but you have small markers to show that these persons are talking differently from other ones. By, let's say, in Trainspotting, you wouldn't find any long sentences with too many commata, but too many grammar involved. It's more spoken. When you have that, when it's more spoken, you as a German reader will probably find, okay, it's a scene of friends, obviously a group that talks together all the time, they use the same word, and then I get the rest of the story. Once in a while, you have to get that dialect thing out of your way to tell the story in the translation. There is actually no way possible to have a dialect, to translate a dialect into another language without losing things or adding things or changing things. J.J. Phillips' Mojo Hand is the story of a white woman who falls in love with a black blues musician. She's white, she's upper class, well, upper middle class, and he's just a black, poor Southern musician. And so he talks kind of black English, and that woman talks kind of WASP English. In the German translation, the blues singer talks like your everyday guy in the streets of, let's say, the Ruhr area, and the woman talks highbrow German. But that's not meant in the original text. You don't have that social distancing was not in the original text. So something happened in the translation that's totally wrong. Dialect is not the point in this case. You have to take care of that. You have to show that there are different voices talking, but you can do that with other screws, nuts and bolts I have in my workspace.
One of the, just a kind of one more question I wanted to ask before we take some questions from the audience is, you not only are you a literary translator, but you're somebody who teaches literary translation. And do you think that it's possible to teach people to translate? Do you think, I mean, is it that translators are born, not made, and that really there's there are limits to what's possible to teach people in translation?
That's another good question. I do think that it is possible to teach translation, but it would be more of a arts studio where you show how you paint while you paint. You show other people while you paint what you're doing. So what I do is I don't have any kind of textbook I teach from page 1 to page 300, but I do translate a text together with them. We all start at the very same time, and we all start working on that text, and we talk about it. And then I can show them, okay, I understand your question, but here is the point, here's the answer I would find. Or, in this case, we would have to do some more research on that topic because something seems to be at odd here, or something we don't understand yet. So I can talk about how I translate and how I find all the means I need to translate that book into a form that I would say is similar to the original. I wouldn't know how you could do that otherwise. There might be some translators born with that ability, but I don't think so. When I look around and see all the colleagues around me, and we're a good bunch in Germany, and we're highly connected. We ask ourselves questions and we give ourselves answers all the time. So it's a huge community. You would be amazed what kind of people you'll find there, under what circumstances they work, and where they come from, with the background. Like one of the translations of the new translations of Moby Dick was done by a man who was actually a merchant shipment. He worked on ships for quite a while, so he knew the stuff he was talking about. And he was a scholar too, but he worked on ships, and so he had a totally different feeling of that book, obviously. And you find justices, you find every kind of situations. So the more life experience you have, and the more interest you have in the surroundings and in the world, the easier it will be for you to translate text. You will understand more about them. You will find the questions you have to ask the author, or you have to ask the text, easier than just to learn how to speak or write that language and then translate word by word. You remember that, surely, that translation of Harry Potter's novels done by the community on internet. You translate a page, then the next one translates a page. It's just a huge humbug. It's just terrible, terrible. Nobody talks about that anymore. That's not the way translation works. You don't take word by word and then you just put them together word by word in the same word order or anything like that. If you don't understand that there are different rhythms to language in the different languages, different rhythms to the sentence, you will not be able to translate that sentence into any other language.
Peter, one of the questions come in here from Paolo Dever is he wants to know about your approach to translating jokes. How do you render humor in German coming from English, and of course the different Englishes? So do you just feel plunging your head into your hands when dealing with jokes? Or, so what's your general approach to the question of translating humor?
It's a very good question. Two approaches I have for that. The one is we have a huge amount of translations in German. So for hundreds of years, Germans tend to translate a lot of books into German. So it won't be that difficult to find. Most of the common jokes in the English language have been translated already someplace or sometime. So I'll look that up. Then I ask my colleagues, and in certain cases, like Adrian McKinty does that to me all the time. His running gag is his hero is doing the London Times crossword puzzle, always involving jokes. How do you translate that? So this is really a situation where I sit there, oh no, Adrian, not again one of those things. So that takes me a lot of time to get this done. But it's fun, actually. It's actually fun. It's really kind of, I really have to do my best, and I want to do that. And it's just, I really think a lot about that joke or that innuendo, this sarcasm or irony or any kind of layer underneath it. And after a while, you simply have the skill to kind of sense that something might be here that I might have to look up or ask other people about. And especially with jokes or any kind of cursing or whatever, you really have to be very, very careful. But that's a lot of fun, actually. I don't have an example right now at hand. But we all do, and we all colleagues do that. We have our own mailing forum, and quite a few of those questions involve jokes and innuendos, sarcasm. So it's important to have more people.
Yeah, I mean, do you find as a translator that you're kind of sitting there having your Sunday lunch, and all of a sudden you kind of stand upright and rush to your study, and you just find a particular way of rendering or capturing something, that this kind of eureka moment?
Absolutely. And I do ask my family, for example, what do you think about that joke? Does it work in German? Can I keep that joke? Or do I have to translate it? Why does a French chef only use one egg for an omelette? Because one egg is enough.
So you have to say, yeah, I know.
So what I do with that is, can I keep it in French? Can I keep that French sentence in German? Can I do that? Or do I have to invent another joke? I don't know what my solution was. That it's a couple of years ago. So yeah, I do keep pen and pencil next to the bed, and I am deep in the book while translating. So it happens that I either miss lunch or dinner, or eat something, but my mind is someplace else.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for me to, when I have an author that I know well, to be, that sounds strange, but to be in that place.
Yeah.
So when I translate Gary Disher's Australian novels, somewhere out there in the outback, I'm sure there are moments when I'm sitting here translating and I'm there. In that street, in that car, it's hot and it's dusty and only for seconds or maybe milliseconds, but I'm really in that book, and that helps a lot, absolutely, to get in contact. And then it's easier to talk about jokes and stuff.
Yeah. I've got a question from Sabina Strumpf, who wants to know whether, you know, when you start translating a text, do you have a particular kind of strategy, or is it something that sort of just comes from the text itself as you kind of you work your way through it? In other words, do you have a kind of systematic policy about kind of keeping foreign names, or, you know, modernizing the language, or, you know, I mean, are there any hard and fast rules, or is it really it's more like a form of dancing? You dance the text and see what emerges.
That's a very good picture, actually, because even in dance you have hard and formal facts you have to take care of. Otherwise it's not a dance, it's just jumping up and down. Yes, I do have certain strategies, but I don't have the same strategy for every book. One of the really nice qualities of this profession is that every book is new and comes with its own certain challenges. So I do read the book, and I make notes what will be researched. For example, when I notice David Peace, for example, is an author who tends to have quotes from all the literature around the world inserted someplace in the text. You wouldn't notice as an English-speaking reader, but when you notice it, it's just fine. But he doesn't show the quote. He only shows it, well, maybe to his translators only. So I have to find that quote, and then I have to insert it without showing it again. So, and it goes from Benjamin Britten over Japanese no drama to Büchner's Wojciech, whatever. Alice in Wonderland is everywhere around the world. So yeah, when I notice that I have to take care of that more often than in any other book, I'll take care of that more often, just to keep an eye open for sentences that seem to be a quote. It actually speaks to one of my more manic sides, I think. I really do want to know certain things. So when there are street names in books, I look them up. Before the internet, I bought a street map of, say, Dublin for a certain novel, and looked it up. And when I found out the author meant a kind of fictional Dublin, okay, that's just fine, but I really had to know that. So I'm more of the research is a huge point for me. So I have to, when I open up a book and I find, okay, this takes place in Japan, I certainly will have to take care of a Japanese transcription, the European transcription of the Japanese street names or places names or people. But one point is a very important point in that question is, what do I do with names or place names? That's easy. I do keep them. I do keep them. It gives a certain flavor of the original place in a German text, to have, when you don't translate everything. It's, how do I say that? You're in a Western scene someplace in the States, and the cowboy rides from here to there, and it's so and so many miles. What do you do in the translation? So and so many miles or so and so many kilometers? Nope. You keep miles, because taking place in the 19th century, you would have had miles in Europe too. So it gives both the sense of the other place and of the other time without changing a word, just by keeping it. So if you're in a Russian novels, you keep Verst for a distance, whatever. With small, as I said, with small elements, you can have large impact on the book. But I do have to take care of that with every book anew. Absolutely.
There's a question from Loretta Nicharagin here asking, are you lonely? Is it a lonely job being a translator? You know, is it a kind of a lonely task, and that it's something you've got to accept as part of the territory?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's absolutely true. I'm not afraid of big books. So 500 pages, 600 pages, 800 pages, I don't care. It takes time. And I'm with the book is with me. Usually I carry around that book all day long, up and down the street, and read further pages. I'm very well organized myself. So I can do that. I can take care of the daily stuff and take care of the book at the same, well, at certain different hours, but at the same time. I started as a bachelor while translating. Usually I was a student, and translated for quite a while before I got married, and we have children now. But I'm still able to just sit here in my office and do that work for so many hours a day. And you really have to do that. Otherwise, you would never be able to finish a book. I even do say I have a daily chore of doing 10 pages, and that's it. It's tomorrow 10 pages, and now you add up. It's very easy to have 500 pages done in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. That's no problem whatsoever. You have to be very self-organized about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Just, I mean, one final question that so wanted to put to you, Peter, is, you know, Rilke wrote those very famous letters to a young poet. If you were to write to a kind of Besetzer translator rather than a dichter, I mean, and you were to write letters to a young translator, what kinds of things do you think you put in these letters? What sort of things would you say to a young translator beginning their career as a literary translator?
I actually do that all the time. As I've started finding my own book and offering that to publishers, I'm doing that all the time. The moment I find texts, I offer those texts to other people. I'm not waiting here for books to arrive at my desk. I offer books to publishers. And that would be my very first point to make. We all are translators. It's not that difficult to translate from one language to the other. You can convey meaning. That's not that difficult. But if you don't want to do it, if you think this is a profession just like any other profession, you will not succeed. You cannot go to a publishing house and say, "Hi, I'm good at English. Do you have a book for me to translate?" Yeah, you and 3 million other people. But when you go to a publishing house and say, "I'm a translator and I have a book for you, and I know that this is just perfect for your series, and I know that you have done certain things, would you like me to translate a couple of pages?" And if you know that book well, and it's your book, then you will probably succeed. So there is more to that profession than just being able to translate from one language to the other, but you have to have love for the subject and love for that one first book. The one book is always most important.
Well, Peter, I think that certainly for anybody who's been watching or listening to our conversation this evening, it just increases the sense of expectation when you will physically arrive in Dublin, and you'll be able to join us in the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation under the aegis of Literature Ireland. We do very much look forward to welcoming you in the flesh in Dublin. But I think what you've given us this evening is an absolutely fascinating insight into your career, your experience as a translator. And I think we're all extremely grateful for the honesty and directness with which you've shared your experiences and your thoughts on translation. So once again, on behalf of everyone who has watched, listened in this evening, I would like to thank you very much for taking part in this conversation. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. It was very, very awfully nice. And I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.
Great.